Chag Sameach. My wife Rachel has a memory, and her sister Sarah is here, so she'll have to confirm if this is true. But she has this memory that when she was 3 years old, she was in her crib, and she desperately wanted to get out of this crib. And she looked around, and she tried to climb out this way, she tried to climb out that way, no way out. Then somehow something happened, and suddenly she was on the other side. She got out of her crib, and she's walking out, jailbreak. How did she do it? Nobody knows. But such a natural instinct, especially in babies and toddlers. I have two nieces who are 10 months old, and you can just see they're dying to be free, whatever they can do to get away from their parents and to explore and crawl around. And as children, we yearn for that freedom. Even older children keep pushing against their parents to get away, imagining on the other side of all those parental boundaries is the true freedom they crave. But they sense that this is their right, that they have this right to be free, their deepest wish. And that instinct probably runs in all of us. Even as part of the lesson of this holiday, of Passover, is the real freedom itself is really a very precious gift, and not something that happens so easily. And as we say again and again on Pesach, that the freeing from Egypt was really an act of grace by God, right? The 4 cups of wine symbolize the 4 actions that God had to take for us to finally be free. And it was not simple. God had to hear their cries of their suffering. God had to come with the outstretched arm and do miracles and wonders to deliver them, and then God had to direct them to their land. So it was grace. It was all divine grace. How else could they leave the bonds of the mightiest empire of the time, Egypt? So we say in the Haggadah, if God hadn't taken us out of Egypt, we would still be there amidst the hardship and the slavery to this very day. And so we know it's all grace to be freed of any real bondage, from the bondages we face as individuals and all the traits and behaviors that form us, to force us into ways of being and acting that are against our own best interest, all those inner grooves of a person. And the bondages of families, those that we pass down from generation to generation to limit our ability to love and to be present with the people in our lives, to skew our understanding of what it means to be a parent or a child or a sibling. And there's bondages of nations. It's how hard to break out of small-mindedness and ways of acting that lead to conflict, and the very stories that enslave the fate of nations, and the bondage of all of us as a humanity struggling to find a common way forward and a vision forward. And so half of all the Passover stories, like Haggadah, keep telling us again and again how we need that divine action because of how dire bondage is, how difficult it is to be free, and that the Torah never sugarcoats our human condition of being in that bondage. But then there is the other half. And the other half is a half of the promise that also keeps coming back, and that is that the divine grace always comes, always comes. And that the movement of the world itself is always from that bondage to freedom. And that the redemption from Egypt was just one small taste of the redemption that humanity is slowly working towards, one day at a time, one day at a time. So there's this Swedish book that a member of the synagogue who's Swedish gave to me last year. And it's written by a Swedish professor. And he did a study, and in this study, he was astounded to see the people, especially in Western nations, always are much more skeptical about the fate of humanity than it actually is. And he found that humans, the people, are invariably thinking the world is in decline, and everybody around the world is doing worse. The poverty and suffering is everywhere. But as he pointed out in his book, And as he did interviews of people, well, actually, you're wrong. According to every major index, humanity is doing much better than it's ever done before. And in every continent, in almost every country, deaths from preventable diseases are down, and child mortality is down, and life expectancy is on the rise. And really, over the past 50, 100 years, the condition of humanity has improved many times, manyfold. He said from his study, so we often imagine the world outside the Western countries is just people are just living hand to mouth, but actually in reality, most people around the world have enough to eat, have vaccines, have access to a good enough life, the basic necessities to live a meaningful life. And that the trend of humanity, despite all of it, and we have many challenges as well, but the trend is good. And the Haggadah itself, right, takes us through these 15 steps from bondage to freedom. And there's no other way to end the Seder. Even if you end it at the meal, you still are experiencing freedom. And the redemption and the songs you sing are because freedom is always going to come. The rabbis imagine, they imagine a journey from shame to praise. You never stay in the shame, you always get to the praise. And we see at the end of the Maggid section, God took us from slavery to freedom, from sorrow to joy, from mourning to festivity, from thick darkness to a great light, from enslavement to redemption. Let us sing before God a new song, hallelujah. And every year we sing this song. A new song because it's old songs on one level, but really a new song because every year there's a new freedom out there if we have the eyes to see it. And this is the movement of the holiday on every level. Behind that movement, the belief is that there is the grace of the divine. It doesn't always happen as we expect it, but then when it does happen, God comes and grace flows and we're redeemed. And yet part of the message of the Haggadah and of this holiday is we also have to play our part. And half of all the Psalms are about this. From the straits I called out to you. We have to at least do that. And you answered me in the expanses. We have to at least open the door for Elijah to come. Because if we don't open the door, how will we hear the messenger of Besorot Tovot, of good news, to bring redemption, the Mashiach? So we have to open the door and be willing to spend a few moments with that door open. And we have to play our part. And one of the essential messages of our religion is of our partnership with God. In the beautiful Midrash, that one day the Roman governor Rufus challenged Rabbi Akiva, why do Jews circumcise? Didn't God make creation perfect as it was meant to be? And Rabbi Akiva said, wait here. And he went back and he came back to see Governor Rufus. And on one hand he had grapes, and the other hand he had wine. He said, well, which is better, the grapes or the wine? And Rufus had to admit the wine. They went back and he got flax in one hand, and the other hand he had clothes. And he said, well, which is better, the flax or the clothes? And well, the Rufus had to admit clothes were more useful. And finally he went and he got wheat in one hand and bread. And he said, which is more useful, the wheat or the bread? So he said, you're right, God gave us the world, but it's our duty to work with God to, in partnership, bring yet more transformation and more redemption for the betterment of our world. And so freedom is precious. And freedom is a grace when it really comes. And as Aaron of Karlin, as I mentioned earlier, teaches, that Seder night is that greatest light of the year of grace flows to us, the light of redemption. And it's the light of freedom that's at the core of reality, the freedom that we all have to grow, the freedom to evolve and create, and to be our true self amidst all of it, and then to be the agents through it of freedom to others, divine grace, of compassion, and bringing generosity to our world in need. Chag Sameach.